guys, welcome back. It's the Luna and Red reading show.
Uh-huh.
We are still coming at you with the Richmond Survival Camp book of 3020, written by Mr. Geo, aka George Edenbaum. We are currently on chapter 7. We accidentally read chapters 4, 5, and 6 in the last video. We were hoping to do it by twos, but we were just captivated by the story, and we hope that you are captivated by the story too.
Yep.
So today we're picking up with chapters 7 and 8, and chapter 7 is Winter of 2019.
It was November, and with most towns, cities being ghost towns, it had been a long and exhausting trip back home to Richmond. Daryl and Nadia had walked most of the way, occasionally coming across abandoned vehicles that still had some fuel. They would steal them or borrow them, which helped push them forward along their trip. The weather had not been kind either. Freezing cold temperatures and snow falling forced them to stop sometimes, days at a time, and take shelter in any abandoned house or building that they could find. Daryl added some twigs to the fire. He had kept going for some time now, which helped him and Nadia stay warm. Nadia sat across from Daryl, next to their makeshift table they had built from wooden crates. She sat cross-legged on the floor, with a bowl of soup in her hands. Rifle stood just next to her, leaned against more crates. Nadia had become handy with a rifle. She had learned to be a good shot as she picked up some skills at survival camp from years before.
Best Thanksgiving dinner right here, Daryl commented as he lifted his own bowl of soup off the table. His two pistols sat on the table in front of him. This evening was cold. Snow had been falling for days, and their pace towards home had slowed down immensely. Daryl worried they would not be back at Richmond in time to sign Nadia up for consideration to be one of the children chosen to be cryo-frozen.
Yeah, to add its best. Nadia did her best to keep her spirits up in front of her dad, but she was overwhelmed with the loss of her mother. She always had coped with knowing that if she is chosen to be cryogenically frozen, she would have to say goodbye to her father forever. She thought of the unknown, being lonely without her parents if she woke up one day was something that no young child could bear. But after 5 years of survival camp, she had learned to be strong against adversity. Daryl smiled at Nadia and sipped his soup as he looked at her and froze the image of the two of them in his mind. He knew this was the last Thanksgiving he would share together.
What year would she wake up? How will the world be then? Daryl thought to himself. Most of all, he wondered if by then, if the GDI had been defeated, and she would have a fighting chance at growing old and happy in whatever her world would be like in the future. Better get some rest, Daryl told Nadia after they both had finished their soup. They both laid near the fire and quickly fell asleep. The next morning, the weather had decided to give them a break, and it stopped snowing. Daryl woke first and was delighted to see that for once the sun shone through the freezing cold air. It was a major relief and would help them get ahead on their trip. Daryl woke Nadia, who too was happy to see that finally the snow had stopped falling. We'll have to pick up the pace today if we want to make it to Richmond before Christmas time, Daryl said as he gathered their things and put out the fire which still burned. Nadia followed and put her things together and grabbed her rifle, putting it around her shoulder. Daryl and Nadia walked for hours. It was midday, and they had made quite a stride. Daryl couldn't help but notice that each town they saw, which were previously still occupied by the few folks who had stayed in their homes to face their fates there, were now complete ghost towns. Most houses were destroyed. The only things that moved and breathed were the few household pets that now roamed the towns on their own. As the hours passed, Daryl and Nadia were closer to home. Finally, after weeks of traveling and hiding from GDI, they could see Richmond in the distance. There were pockets of smoke visible, and there seemed to be signs of life. This was a relief for Daryl, as he had worried that they would be too late reaching home. Daryl grabbed Nadia's hand as they started to sprint. "Come on, sweetie, let's hurry and find shelter before we're spotted by the GDI." They noticed a huge warehouse that was still intact. They rushed to it, keeping a low profile so that they wouldn't be seen by any of the machines. Once they had reached the building, they noticed blue barrels of water lined up behind sandbags, which seemed to be barricades of some sort. What the heck? Daryl thought to himself. As they approached the odd barricades, a man stood from behind one and waved at them to hurry. "Hey, I'm Daryl, and this is my daughter Nadia." Daryl introduced them as they got behind the barricades. The man was armed with a gun and carried grenades attached to his belt on his waist. Daryl figured he was with the resistance.
"Welcome." The man shook Daryl's hand and patted Nadia's head. "I'm Hank. I'm out here keeping the look. Look, we take turns on it today. Today is my turn," the man replied.
"We? Are you with the resistance?" Daryl asked, and the man nodded.
Yeah, basically. If you're alive and out here, not behind the military's control, you are with the resistance." "Where are you both coming from?" the man inquired, intrigued by the new faces.
"We went to the Groom Lake Air Force Base in Nevada." Daryl paused. It's gone now. Completely destroyed. We're the only ones who made it." Daryl looked down as he spoke.
Must have been tough," the man replied.
"There's nothing and no one left for miles and miles. Towns and cities are complete ghost towns." Daryl sighed.
"A lot of folks has come down here. Seems everyone has resided in the fact that our only little ones will survive." Hank looked at Nadia as he explained further. "My son, who is about her age, has signed up." Hank then looked up at Daryl. "If you want her to be a part of it, you need to get her registered. Training and trials will begin soon."
"So how many children will be chosen?" Daryl asked.
Who knows? I can't really say, but there are several hundred who will have signed up for the evaluation." Hank sat down behind the barricade as he continued further. "The rest of us have all just come together helping to keep the GDI behind and far as possible so our children have the chance to and the project succeeds."
"So what's with all these barriers?" Daryl was curious.
"Well, we discovered the machines can't scan through water. This helps us stay hidden as long enough for us to shoot it after we spots," Hank explained.
You mean their necks?" Daryl asked, receiving a nod in reply.
The Guardians are easy to take out. A few shots, their armor is pierced through, and Centios, however, are harder. Their armor is made out of a special steel that we still can't figure out to cut through. But every place where the limbs bend is unprotected by the steel. Like their necks, their knees, elbows. Daryl listened carefully as he went on. "Now, the Titans, those scare me. We haven't destroyed one of them, and we haven't figured out any link point. It's just like they're entirely made from special steel, which explains how heavy and slow they are," Hank explained.
"We were afraid we'd come too late to get her registered," Daryl sighed.
"Nah, you got here with plenty of time. There are complications."
"Complications?" Daryl quickly questioned and worried.
"Yeah, they delayed the project by a few months. Seems like they're having trouble with wake-up protocol. All of us are here worried for you. You know, our kids." He looked at Nadia, stood quietly standing.
What's the issue? Does anybody know?" Daryl worried.
"They try to keep it under wraps, but we know," Hank shrugged. "Seems test subjects are waking up too before the program begins proper procedures."
"Why is that a problem?" Daryl asked.
"Well, for one, imagine being the only one who wakes up with no way to wake up the others. You'll be alone for weeks, months, years. Mostly important, some of the test subjects who have woken from the proper procedures have died. have died.
Mm, 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 mm.
This worried Daryl, but they had to weigh their options, and he knew that the best chance of his daughter surviving was to go through with this.
Well, we'll have to take our chances. Daryl looked at Nadia.
Well, I think we've been out here long enough. You should come on inside, meet the others, Haig said as he stood up and started to walk inside the building towards an open door that flung open. The door, which was covered in some crates. Daryl and Nadia followed and went inside the hole underground. It was the underground garage that had been transformed into a huge underground base. Daryl and Nadia both looked around with awe at all the
Wow.
people that had found shelter down there. All were armed, and one way or another, they were all families, couples, single folks, all looking after each other. Daryl couldn't remember ever seeing this many people in Richmond. As Nadia and Daryl explored, they suddenly heard a familiar voice calling out for them.
Nadia! Daryl!
Uncle Mason! Nadia noticed Mason first and rushed to greet him. He opened his arms and embraced her, picking her up off her feet.
Nadia! Mason laughed happily. Holy I cannot believe it! Mason! I'm glad to see you! Mason put Nadia back on her feet and quickly hugged Daryl. Mason then looked around and his demeanor quickly changed. Where's Sam? Both Nadia and Daryl looked down and fought to keep tears out of their eyes. She didn't make it, Daryl struggled with his words. She was there next to me, and then she was gone, Daryl said as Nadia sunk her face into Daryl's arms as she began to cry. No one but us made it. All the ships destroyed. None of them got away. None, Daryl mumbled. But you're both here now, and you're safe, and Nadia can sign up for evaluation. Mason showed Daryl and Nadia around and introduced them to a few people, members of the Resistance. He explained that they were the last line of defense to keep the GDI away from Richmond so that the Richmond mission could continue as planned. All the kids of the people there had signed up for evaluation. Time passed, and Daryl and Nadia had quickly settled in and become accustomed to their new way of life. The children would wake up early just as the sun peered over the horizon and were escorted by members of the Resistance to the Richmond Elementary, the site where the military was evaluating and training the children. Training included being put underwater for long periods of time to help learn to hold their breath. This would come in handy if they would wake up before proper wake-up procedures would take place. It would give them a bigger chance to survive. Training also included lots of exercises, as they needed to be fit and strong. The training wasn't much different from that of a Navy SEAL. However, these were children, and it wasn't surprising that as time went on, the number of children still allowed to train got smaller and smaller. Nadia, of course, made it through every trial that she was put into. December came, and the military had allowed all the families to gather and have their last Christmas together. Everyone knew that it was the last Christmas they would ever see their children. The Resistance decided to hold a feast, and hundreds of families gathered and shared a special meal with happy hymns being sung and lots of smiles. Before the night came and everyone was still happy, dancing, and singing, their party was abruptly interrupted. The familiar sound of sentinels approaching sent everyone into disarray. The crowd scattered and took refuge behind the water barrels, but the sentinels came flying, so the water barrels did very little to conceal them. Threats found were the familiar words no one wanted to hear. Nadia, quick, get inside! Daryl held the door to the underground fort open as the children and others hurried inside. Mason and a few others took cover and fired on the sentinels. Aim for the weak spots! Mason yelled at the others as the shot, one of the sentinels, hitting its neck just right. It came crashing down and exploded. The Resistance managed to destroy 4 of the 5 sentinels, and the last one escaped. However, the humans suffered many casualties that night, and Christmas had been ruined. Chapter 8. July 2018. Crazy bastards! Dr. Wu whined as his assistant took down some notes on her electronic device. Can you believe those idiots? I told them it's not ready. We're at least 2 years from having something that is stable. Dr. Wu went on. But they want it ready by next year? Dr. Wu looked at a glass pod. In it was a small rat, which seemed like it was in a paralyzed state. He pressed some buttons on the computer terminal, and the liquid in the pod was flushed away. Then the small rat became active. We're making some good progress, at least, Dr. Wu muttered. Dr. Wu had been working on cryogenics research for several years. His team had been the only team in the world who had successfully frozen an animal for 1 year and woke it up successfully. Of course, because of his team's great success, the government now wanted him to take his findings to create a plan to cryogenically freeze humans to preserve their lives in the event of world catastrophic events. The catch, however, was that he was only given 10 months to successfully freeze a human. The government also wanted their experiments to be done in secret, as surely such experiments would be met with heavy scrutiny from Congress and the courts. Not to mention, they were not allowed to experiment on humans themselves.
How exactly are we going to be sure that this will work with the human doctor?
His loyal assistant asked. They had experimented on many small animals with mixed results. Their major setback had been the fact that in at least 30% of their experiments, the test subjects would wake up before the proper electronically controlled procedure would begin. This, in all cases, resulted in death of the test subject by drowning, because when they woke up, they would breathe and swallow the liquid that was preserving them. Dr. Wu sighed and looked at his assistant with a blank stare. Only one way. I'll freeze myself. In 1 month, you will oversee the procedure to wake me up, he directed his assistant, who had her doubts.
But doctor, it's too risky.
She contemplated, but Dr. Wu knew it had to be done. It's the only way to know for sure if this works on humans, he explained. So, it was settled. Dr. Wu would freeze himself, and if the experiment was successful, they would then know the procedure was safe on humans. However, they would still need to figure out what caused some subjects to wake up before the time. The day Dr. Wu would be put to sleep soon came. He had prepared himself physically and mentally, and he was ready. He had some fear, but also he had faith in his own research and work.
Are you ready, doctor?
His assistant asked. The scientist was wearing a jumpsuit made from a specially made material whose purpose was to keep the body's temperature at just the correct levels. This jumpsuit, while keeping the body at the right temperature, also had the ability to allow the right amount of liquid to go through the body. The liquid was necessary to prevent his body from aging. Because the body had to be completely submerged, they had come up with a way for the test subject to be allowed to breathe for a short time until they were fully asleep. The time was longer than the average person could breathe. The solution was that they invented a special mask which would detect when the subject stopped breathing. Once they were frozen, the mask would open various pores on its material and allow the liquid to enter, just like the jumpsuit. Dr. Wu grabbed his mask and put it on, securing it tightly in position. I was born ready, my dear, he smirked at his assistant and stepped into the pod. With the scientist now in place, his assistant pressed the button and initiated the process. The tank started to fill up with its bluish-colored liquid. The scientist's eyes stared forward, painted with fear. Soon, the tank was full, and the scientist visibly struggled to stay calm. Then, after a few moments, his eyes were closed, and the procedure was over. For the month ahead, the assistant would go to the secret lab and monitor the cryo settings on the scientist's pod. If this event had been world catastrophic, they would need to find a way to regulate the system without human intervention. The assistant believed that it was possible to program another of the government's experiments to serve this purpose. Its name was SPARKS, which stood for Special Paramedic Automated Robot Knowledge System, also known as SPARKS. Sparks was originally a military robot designed to fight and destroy. The model would later be known as the Sentinel. However, this unit had been shipped to the lab for some unknown testing. A whole month had passed, and it was time to begin the unfreezing process. Sparks was already reprogrammed for the task. Its first step in the process was to make sure the system was ready to unfreeze the subject. The liquid in the tank was flushed, and just seconds later, Dr. Wu began to move. He was awake. He gasped for air and struggled to breathe, but in a few moments later, his signs were normal, and he was fully responsive. The experiment had been a success. After the experiment, the doctor wrote a note. He knew that anyone who would have to go through this procedure should know exactly what to expect. And the note read, "First, I felt cold, freezing temperatures I had never felt before. My heart rate slowed down, and it became difficult to breathe. I felt like having been punched in the gut with tremendous force, but then could not move. I even tried to scream, but I could not move a muscle. I could hear everything around me, but was unable to respond to any of it. Then I felt my life slipping away. At least, that's how it felt. But as soon as my eyes closed, I opened them, and 1 month had passed in an instant." And that's the end of chapter 8. We will be back next week with chapters 9 and 2 special components to the ending of the story.
Remember to grab your snacks.
Yes, grab your snacks, y'all. We'll be back.